7 o'clock, and then I'll call the meeting to order.
All right, so did we establish how the different committees were going to establish quorum? John, do you have a quorum? I see Quentin.
No.
Zach has arrived. You have a quorum.
Okay.
All right. And then Andrew, should we just go down the list and ask people, you know, if Ashby has a quorum, FinCom, Select Board, and Townsend, is that how this should work?
I think so. Legally, it's a Pepperell Finance Committee meeting that folks were invited to. But if you have a quorum and you intend to deliberate on the subject matter of this meeting in your own meetings in the future, it probably pays to take minutes tonight. And so if you'd like to gavel yourselves in, I don't know who should introduce them because I'm not sure who was invited.
Dave, I know you have a quorum with Kathy. If you want to, you know, gavel in your select board.
So we'll call our select board meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. on February 22nd.
I'll call the Pepperell Finance Committee meeting order, also 7:01, and I'll swap over and switch it over to our chairwoman of the Pepperell Select Board, Margaret Scarsdale, and we will walk on the discussion for us.
All right, thank you. Thank you, John. My apologies. I was thinking when you introduced before you had called it to order, I didn't realize you didn't have a quorum. Veronica, do you have a quorum?
We do. So I'd like to call the Townsend Board of Selectmen meeting to order at also 7:01 p.m. Do we need a roll call?
Andrew, I'll let you. Usually for virtual, we have done roll call.
Right.
We don't vote on calling a meeting to order, so we don't. I don't see a need for it. I don't know what your practices are in your community, so.
We don't, it's not a vote, but it's just who's present.
All right, you can do that, Veronica.
All right, so calling the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. Could I have a roll call, please?
Sexton Duranian.
And Veronica Cal present. Thank you.
All right. Is there a FinCom, the FinCom from Ashby? Do you have a quorum, Eldon?
Right now, we do not have a quorum. Myself and the secretary, Robin McCray, are here out of the 5. So we've only got 2 to 5. So if we get a third, should I call it? Would it be okay if I just call for it when a third shows up?
I think that would be fine.
Okay.
We have the Townsend Select Board. Veronica, if you could help me out here, does the FinCom, is there representation from the Townsend FinCom here?
Yes, I believe there is. I see Dawn Hayes on. Dawn, is there anyone else there? Do you have a quorum?
I don't see anybody else come in. Don't have a quorum.
All right. Craig, from the school committee, do you think you have a quorum?
We do not. We currently have 4 members. So if we do get one more, we'll need to just take a pause and call ourselves to order.
All right, excellent. And I see Nancy Haynes and Nancy Milligan and Brad Morgan from the North Middlesex Regional School District. And we'll be doing introductions very quickly in just a minute. Is there anybody here who has not called their meeting to order because they have a quorum? All right, seeing none, I am going to start the meeting as John, or continue this part of the meeting. As John said, I'm Margaret Scarsdale and I'm the chair of the Pepperell Select Board. And on behalf of the town of Pepperell, I want to welcome everyone to this call tonight. I also want to thank Pepperell Community Media. They are recording this meeting and we always appreciate their service in this regard. So I want to jump right into the agenda if we can call that up so that we can be respectful of everyone's time and accomplish what we all came together for. So we'll take a quick look at that. I would, since we have so many people, if we could just very quickly run through the list, and if I miss anybody at the end, we can do a scoop through. Starting, we're going to do introductions. I'm sorry. Just quickly to ground us, we will do a recap of why we were all here, talk about some numbers, hear from the superintendent, Brad Morgan, if he has anything to add to that, and then talk about what we would like to accomplish and what we see as the path forward. So for introduction.
Margaret, sorry, real quick, I just need to call to order the North Middlesex Regional School District School Committee meeting at 7:05 p.m. We had our 5th member join.
All right, thank you, Craig. All right. So for the introductions, if we could just run through, I will start with the Ashby Select Board. If you could maybe just give your name and your title, although I've just said Select Board. So Dave, if you want to do the first introduction and then pass it off to Kathy.
Sure. David Nato, Chair of the Ashby Select Board.
And Kathy Beloris, member of the Ashby Select Board.
All right, and for the FinCom from Ashby?
Eldon Gerhard, I am the chair of the Finance Committee here in Ashby, and thank you everyone for attending.
And I'm Robin McRae. I'm the secretary for the Ashby Finance Committee.
All right, thank you. And we'll do the school committee with each town. So I know we have a school committee member from Ashby here, at least one.
Yes, hi, I'm June McNeil. I'm the Ashby rep.
All right, moving on to Townsend for the select board.
I'm Veronica Kell, and I am the chairman of the Townsend Board of Selectmen.
And I am Chad Sexton Duranian. I'm the clerk of the select board.
Welcome. Any FinCom members from Townsend?
Don Hayes, I'm chairperson of the FinCom committee.
Thank you. And school committee members from Townsend?
Looking to see, I know they were invited.
I'm talking on mute, of course. I started it off for us tonight. I'm sure I won't be the last. Susan Robbins, school committee representative for Townsend.
All right, thank you, Susan.
This is Randy Rush. I'm not sure where you would want me to introduce myself. I live in Townsend, but I'm an at-large member representing all 3 towns on the school committee.
All right, excellent. Thank you for jumping in with that. And for Pepperell, it is the FinCom's meeting. So if the FinCom members would like to introduce themselves, starting with the chair.
Sure, John Laddick, Chairman of the Pepperell Finance Committee.
I'm Clayton Cutler, member of the Finance Committee in Pepperell.
Zach Leach, member of the Pepperell Finance Committee.
All right, for the select board, I have introduced myself, and for the school committee from Pepperell.
So I'm Craig Hansen. I am a Pepperell member of the school committee and also the chair.
Tom Casey, Pepperell member of the school committee.
All right, and Brad, would you like to introduce your team or have them introduce themselves and you go first?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I can start off. Brad Morgan, School District Superintendent. And I know that we have Nancy Milligan and Nancy Haynes, so I'll let Nancy introduce herself first and then Nancy Haynes after that. And I think that's it based on the list that I'm looking at.
Nancy Milligan, Assistant Superintendent for the schools. And I'm Nancy Haynes, the Business Manager for North Middlesex.
All right, who have I missed? I think I missed the town administrator from Townsend, and I see a couple of people from Ashby. So if anybody elected or appointed is on the call, if you want to jump in, and I apologize for the overlook. Ross?
Hi, Ross Perry, interim town administrator in Townsend.
Andrew McLean, the town administrator from Pepperell, is here tonight.
Christine Lindberg, town administrator from Ashby.
All right, I think we might have swept everyone. Just a quick housekeeping note. I'm sure everyone knows how these Zoom calls or GoToMeeting virtual calls work. And just to reduce background noise, if you could mute yourself if you're not speaking, although we want this to be a very interactive call. That's the reason that we're all together. So feel free to unmute at any time. Feel free to put information in the chat if you feel like that's better. And we will move right along. Andrew, I think we can skip the next slide because we did this, the introductions. If you would like to...
Margaret?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Susan. I just wanted to interrupt real quick. I wanted to see if we had a representative from Mars on the line, the regional school district organization.
Good question. Brad, do you see anyone, or Nancy?
I do not. In the names, I don't see anybody.
Okay. All right. Andrew, I thought I saw the there we go. Do you mind to walk us through this one? You have these numbers pretty solid and could probably explain them more succinctly.
Sure. I think you all know why this meeting was called tonight. But at a really high level, the North Middlesex school budget is about $61.5 million. And that's a little more than a 3% increase over the previous year. And Brad or Nancy, if you want to correct this after I'm done, that's fine. I'm using the numbers presented on February 1st. I don't know if they've been modified. State funding from Chapter 70 to North Middlesex is up less than 0.5%. And so when you factor in the state aid into that $61 million budget, the 3 towns in the district need to make up the difference. And for that reason, each of our assessments are up more than 4%. And for some of the towns in the district, this is a problem. For some towns, it's a big problem.
All right. Brad, did you want to add anything to this? Does that seem square?
So it's definitely square. I think the only thing that I would add is this, certainly this year, it seems to be a bigger problem, a significant problem for one of the 3 towns. But overall, this is my 4th year in the district. Each year, we're right around this 3% number. And the 3% is really, the majority of that is made up of collective bargaining agreements, health insurance, and transportation. And really, health insurance and transportation are costs that we really cannot control. Those numbers are often given to us from our health insurance consortium, and the transportation. We only get 1 bid on regular ed transportation annually. We do not have anyone else that bids, and we are not alone in that. And just from my point of view, I have spoken to the Solicitor General at the state level. We've also spoken to the Attorney General, and very little can be done with regard to that by the school district. It's going to have to be done at the State House. So again, it's really a constant challenge, but that 3.06 really is collective bargaining, insurance, and transportation, and that's pretty much how it is every year. So when it comes to making reductions to the budget, in order to make any real reductions, we will be making reductions to actual pre-existing people in the budget. So it's a challenge, and I do feel like, initially schools were regionalized to help the towns, but also help the state. And I do not think that the state is following through on some of the promises that they made to regional school districts, especially with regard to transportation, when they promised to pay 100%, and they are not paying 100%. Not only are they not paying 100%, they're really paying closer to 70%. They are doing nothing to help with the bidding process or lack thereof. because there is no real bidding process. The regional schools are not alone in that. The transportation setup has pretty much been territorialized across the Commonwealth, and companies do not bid against other companies in order to basically secure themselves, I guess. So it definitely has a significant impact. You know, our last contract was a 22% increase over 3 years. And that's, you know, when this contract runs out, we'll likely be looking at something along those lines, just because of the current state of, you know, finding bus drivers, keeping companies afloat, leases, gas, things of that nature. I can't imagine that we are going to be blessed, if I should say, with a 22% increase in our next contract. I think it would be significantly higher when that comes around. So it's a challenge, and it's really all regional school districts are facing this, and it's something that needs to be addressed at the state level. So we definitely need some help. We realize that we're asking the towns for money that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to come up with. That being said, we want to make sure that we're maintaining the best possible school system we can for the communities.
All right, thank you for that, Brad. I mean, yes, in a nutshell, the funding from the state continues to leave the regional schools trailing other districts, as our own town administrator has said. So that brings us to what really is the heart of this meeting. What can we as a group do to fix this in the short term for this year, and then longer term, because this year it's hitting Ashby, but next year it could hit any of the other of us. And my own personal feeling is that there hasn't been a united front to go to the State House. You know, as Brad was saying, you know, much of the solution comes from the State House. And if there's no loud voice saying we need this change, there's no reason to pay attention, right? It's that old squeaky wheel. So we're sort of at the place we're going to call brainstorming, because for Pepperell, and we're happy to add other goals, because even though we convened this meeting, we really see it as our district's meeting, and this meeting is for all of us. But in the short term for FY23, what are some things that we can do collectively as 3 towns, as part of a regionalized group, to make this budget more affordable? And then longer term, some ideas, and we might only be able to brainstorm longer term ideas tonight, but some ideas from Pepperell are reduce the general law requirement to have a seat for every single person, you know, who could take the bus. So if you have a seat requirement, but the buses aren't filled, definitely we should look at updating the regional agreement. I understand that that just could not happen this year, but maybe at the end of this meeting, we can agree that some of us are going to talk to look at that agreement and see what some of the language could be that could be changed, including to have a 5-year rolling average, you know, of towns' school enrollment, so that no one town takes a hit like currently Ashby is facing right now because of the spike in their enrollment. So I thought we could see how this will go and take ideas from the floor. We have another slide. Andrew has agreed to scribe ideas for us, thinking first on the short-term goals. I had outlined some in my email to everyone, but would love to hear what other people are thinking. And Andrew, we lost the screen share. You're just going to take the notes on the side as we're talking so we can all see each other. Oh, you're muted.
I have to put it into edit mode to edit it, so I'll put it back up on the screen in a moment.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that will give people a minute to collect their thoughts. I see Mike Bussell on the call. Mike, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening. Mike Bussell. I'm the fire chief in Ashby. I was the interim town administrator. Christine is on currently, so if we're going to have a spokesperson, it'd be Christine or the select board or the finance committee. But thank you. This is an important meeting for all, and I look forward to the collaboration of all 3 towns trying to help solve this issue facing all of us.
Exactly. All right, so again, you can unmute yourself to throw out ideas or use the chat. Kathy, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
I'm not speaking,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but I was trying to send a question, and somehow it ended up just going to Brad, but I meant it to go to everyone. And that is the collective bargaining agreement for this year, are any of them new starting this year, or are they already, somewhere within a 2 or 3 year agreement, or what's the status of those, please?
All of them are year one this year. They're all 3-year contracts and all are year one of one right now. So
Okay.
moving into next year, they'll be in year 2 or 3.
Okay.
Brad, David from Ashby. Just a quick question. I think it was one of the last budget summit meetings you talked about adding, I think, 5.6 people to the staff. Was that correct?
I don't have the budget message in front of me, but it was in that neighborhood. Yes, it was.
What positions were being added? Could you clarify on the positions that were being added?
Sure. So one of them would be an assistant director of facilities. That job is getting increasingly larger, especially with the technology in some of the buildings. It's becoming very difficult for one person to handle. We're looking at adding some school adjustment counselors, so some social emotional support. Another maintenance position because we are shorthanded with regard to maintenance, and possibly a couple of teachers. Based on class sizes. We're always going to put, some teachers in there just in case, because obviously once the budget's passed, if we have some new move-in, we do frequently have move-ins over the course of the summer, and all 3 towns have a pretty high foster family population. We want to make sure that we have those positions in the budget if it's needed. If it's not needed, then we don't fill the position. It's not something that we use if it's not needed. But we do have to make sure that if we start getting into the very high 20s, possibly low 30s in some of our classrooms, that we're able to address it if need be.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Veronica Kellen Townsend. I guess my question is, if there are school adjustment counselors or any of these teachers, is it possible to use ARPA funds to fund those positions? I don't know what the ARPA funding situation is at the schools, but I'm wondering if that's a possibility for some of these.
Good question.
Nancy Haynes, you want to take that one?
We do have a plan for using what's called ESSER funds for the school, and that included some stipends and nursing services and custodial. We'd have to look at the grant and see what other things we would take out to then support those. It also puts some of those positions in a one-time, like a 1-year situation. So we'd be having this conversation next year potentially if those positions end up in the budget in the short term on a grant. Then next year we don't have the grant, then that would potentially be the issue at that point.
Christine Lindberg from Ashby. Just had a quick question. Brad, earlier today when we met, you were saying that the collective bargaining agreement, your FY22 was a 1%, and then an FY23 it was a 1.5% plus a 1% for the top step. And when I asked how many of your staff members are going to get that extra 1% at the top step, you said about half of your staff. So do you have a dollar figure that you can assign to what that 1.5% and then the additional 1% is for half of your staff? Do you have what the increase is going to be from FY22 to FY23 for those COLAs?
I don't have it in front of me, but it's certainly something I can email to everyone.
I mean, I understand that that's collective bargaining, and so that is something that we are going to have to absorb. However, I think that seems like that's going to be a big jump in affect the cost of the contract. So that's definitely something that we need to look at.
Sure.
Thank you.
Totally understand that.
John, did you want to talk through your ideas in the chat? Those seem like also some very specific short-term ones. You're muted, John. John, you're muted.
Margaret, I wanted to add something too when you get a chance.
Yeah, we all received the budget from the school, and I think if you go through there, you can see there are a lot of several areas where the increases were way above 3%, and I think we should either get some specific feedback of why those were so large, or perhaps the school committee can sharpen the pencils and come back with some lower numbers for those cases. I think we could also make a case to the school committee to use a higher percentage of the E&D money. And the reason I say that is every time, in my experience, where something has to be done at the schools always come back to us and ask the towns to pay for it. So I really never see you folks use your E&D money for anything except build up your bank account. The other thought was to ask for a commitment for additions of state aid from the governor's budget be addressed to this budget and not for additional new spending. And I think we also have to contact our legislative delegation for support of some type to see if there's anything they can do in the short term to help us out with this deficit, with this large assessment. That was it.
Thank you.
David from Ashby. I'd also concur. I think using more of the E&D to offset some of this would be a good idea, and sharpening the pencils. You know, we have multiple positions that are open in town, and we're going to probably look at not filling them due to this increase, which will cripple us. How much of the E&D were you using this year, Brad?
Was I believe it was 2.5.
Which would leave how much?
$1,045,000. If you don't mind if me speak up about the E&D, the use of E&D, is that okay? So we're using $1,045,000 and we have approximately 3.2. I have the number in a minute. But the issue of using, say, another, I mean, we can use additional E&D funds to support the budget. What will happen next year is that it will feel like a revenue reduction next year if we can't use that amount. So if we use, let's say, $500,000 more next year, it'll feel like you guys are absorbing a $500,000 increase when there isn't one. So it's risky to do that. It's been increased a lot over the years. I get it. Using that funds, it's an easy plug it in and go forward. But the problem in doing that again is all three towns will feel that next year when we reduce that. If we can't sustain that, it's equivalent to using free cash to support your budget. So eventually you might not have it, and then it's going to feel again like you're cutting your budget next year, or having an exorbitant increase to absorb it.
I need to interrupt for a second. Our finance committee now has a quorum, so I'm just going to need to call our meeting to order.
Thank you. Was that your heart?
I'd like to call the Ashby Finance Committee to order at 7:30 p.m. Thank you.
All right, other ideas.
This is Chaz from Townsend. I agree that we need to contact our legislative delegation for support. I'm actually kind of surprised we haven't been working with this from the past. I personally would like to see, I know that there's been a lot of funding sent out to the schooling, and I haven't seen how some of that money is spent. I think it would be helpful for us to be able to see that. What monies were actually delegated and what was either spent or where it sits right now. Because we have to back up this information to our towns, and I'd like to have that information available if we have questions on it.
Chaz, this is Susan Robbins on the school committee. What funding are you looking to understand, how it was spent? I didn't quite catch that. I wanted to hear you.
Any type of COVID funding, there was additional fundings that have been sent out. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything in regards to how that was, how much we received and what it was spent on, if it was spent, that kind of stuff.
Got it. I wasn't sure if you meant like Chapter 70, You mean
No.
the new and different stuff related to the pandemic. I understand now. Thank you.
Yep.
So Susan, is that something that the school committee would provide, or that would come from the superintendent or Nancy, just to make sure that the loop is closed for Chaz? Like, how will he actually get this information? Who will that come from?
All of us get that information from Nancy. We go through Brad to make our requests. So that comes from the central office of the district.
Okay.
And the budget message is up on the website, if anyone, that goes really into detail as to how the money that we're asking for in FY23 is going to be utilized.
But I think they want to know that the money we've gotten from the state and federal government that's been pandemic related, like ESSER funds and such.
Correct.
What did we spend that on, or
right.
What haven't we spent yet?
Right, and just to be clear, we are trying to the best of our ability, although we have hired some interventionists to help catch kids up. We are trying to use some of the ESSER funds and have used some of the ESSER funds for things such as Chromebooks, PPE, and things of that nature that we would not normally have had funds for. So realistically, what we have tried to do is not bring on, other than interventionists and a few other staff members, we've tried to avoid using ESSER funds for it, because when that ESSER money runs out, chances are the student needs are not going to run out and those positions are not going to be there anymore. So we do have a phase out plan for those positions, but we also want to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to go heavy on staff and then in 3 years have that staff drop away.
Also, the ESSER 3 funding, the requirement is to post our intended budget on the website, so it's there if you're looking for that. That's part of the ESSER 3 requirements. Before we could get that approved, we had to post that publicly with public input. So we put out a survey to the community to gather input about needs for the funding that drove our ESSER 3 narrative, and also what's in that current budget.
And just to keep us focused, although, those are certainly important questions about ESSER, I believe that's a separate bucket and doesn't affect the FY23 budget. Certainly good to get clarity around it, but, and if I'm wrong about that, somebody please correct me.
Well, if there are adjustment counselors and that sort of thing, that's going to be paid out of that. There may be some reductions in the budget.
Mm.
I would just point out that paying for adjustment counselors and things of that nature out of ESSER is difficult because there were significant social emotional needs, and it was, it was in many ways put forth by DESE prior to COVID. So any type of counselors, if anything, we were shorthanded prior to COVID. We're definitely shorthanded now. So again, we just need to be cautious about bringing people on that are needed, and then having those people leave. The other piece that we have to consider too is being able to actually fill these positions. There is a pretty significant shortage statewide. Positions that we would get literally 100 to 200 applications for previously, we are getting 10, 20, and in many cases people aren't even licensed for the positions that they're applying for. And it's not just here, it's statewide, but there is a significant shortage of people that want to go into education. And that's something that we're going to have to, we'll be experiencing that probably for many years to come.
So this is Susan again. I think one thing I wanted to emphasize on what Brad said, school committee, is that money that's short term, we only want to pay for things that are short term, because the short term money goes away and then but the bill still comes in, but we have to eliminate the positions. So positions that are only needed short term, like the positions to help catch students up, then that's okay to pay with ESSER funds. But we're concerned we'll put the community in even a more difficult spot if we use short-term money to pay for long-term needs. You know, like if you win a $50,000 lottery and you go out and buy a house to pay the mortgage based on that amount of money, when it runs out, you can't afford the mortgage anymore. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here with all you folks that are doing finance all the time, but that's where we're coming from. And that's the same problem with E&D. Once that account runs out, it runs out. So we need to ask for the money from the towns to be able to continue the services that we've always provided to students. Because we do have three basic revenue sources: is the state, the towns, and then the little bit, comparatively speaking, we can chip in from E&D. The problem is that the state funding doesn't keep up with the costs. So if our costs are increasing 3%, the state funding may be increasing, I don't know the number this year off the top of my head, say 0.5%. So the other 2.5% that the state didn't keep up with us, then the towns have to come up with the money to fill that gap where the state didn't. So our revenue doesn't, all the revenue sources don't rise equally. It used to be the state was about half of our funding and the towns were about another half of our funding, and the state would increase at about the same rate that our budget would increase, the modest amount. So the towns, it wasn't, it was more of like a 2.5 increase for the towns, which keeps up with our ability, the town's ability to tax the citizens the 2.5% increase. So certainly the state funding not keeping up with the way health insurance certainly has been a hit. Special education is always a hit. They're absolutely services that we need to provide, but the cost of providing those services are going up beyond our revenue sources going up.
So Margaret, this is Craig. I want to make sure we get back to kind of the intent of this meeting, and that's to really strategize to solve whether it's the immediate issue and then also the long-term issues. I mean, we've been having budget summits with, I think most of these folks were invited since October, and I think we were lucky to get a handful showing up since then. We had our budget hearing a couple weeks ago. Again, only a handful of people showed up to that. So I don't feel it's entirely valuable to keep rehashing the budget. We had this discussion last year with Pepperell and Townsend, and we had it actually as a two-way conversation where they shared their budgets. We shared ours. We went through them all, had some good suggestions, and I think one of the net results of that was using more free cash or more E&D from our budget to close the gap with Pepperell and Townsend. And here we are again, continuing to say if we keep doing that, it's going to put us in a bad situation the next year. And sure enough, here we are in a bad situation the next year. So I think we've got to talk about some new ideas and really figure out how to get out of this hole. Rehashing these same discussions over and over that we've been having since October, I don't feel it's going to move the needle right now.
Thank you, Craig. Andrew, can you go back to the summary slide that you were filling in some numbers on? Like this is really the heart of the problem, that the money is just not coming down from the state. So Andrew, Veronica had asked for clarification on number 2. Is the chapter 78 up only 4% or 0.04?
It's 1/2, a little less than 1/2 of 1%.
And the transportation money specifically in that bucket is down from a year ago. I believe it was down for everyone around 12%, but for North Middlesex, it was down 17%. So these are just enormous hits to our budget. And that's where I felt like we could really try to come together and make an impact, or, you know, put a lot of pressure on the legislature with 3 towns, with their select board, with their FinCom, with their school committee, with the superintendent, with Mars. And hopefully, I did reach out to Senator Goby and Senator Kennedy and Senator Cronin, who will ultimately, I believe, end up representing either Townsend or Ashby after November, and they weren't able to come. But Brad, to come back to you, what do you think would be an entry point for this group, say, for the legislature? What would you like the legislature to do regarding, you know, transportation, Chapter 70 in this short term with the budget that's still out there? What could we ask them specifically to do?
I think something that would help us at the legislative level would be looking at the requirements around regional transportation. The fact that we do have to ensure a seat for every student on the bus. Whether or not we could potentially charge a ridership fee to make up for the, say, 30% that we are not reimbursed for. You know, in comprehensive districts, they charge a ridership fee. Most of them do. We can't charge a ridership fee even to make up the 30% that we're not reimbursed. So I think that would be helpful. You know, just looking at transportation alone, I think would be something that would be very, very helpful to regionals. And, you know, if they're not going to pay 100%, can we avoid the seat for every student? Can we require parents to sign up for the service and sign up almost a 1-year contract? We're either going to take it or we're not going to take it. Base our transportation off of that. Again, consider the 30% ridership fee. And then possibly look at another thing to look at, I think that's in the short term that is within our control, is the regional agreement and how we go about establishing our numbers. And do we want to use October 1 numbers, or do we want to use a 5-year average? I think those 2 things could have a significant impact on the budget. And one of them is within our control.
So for the regional agreement, is that something select the school committees or the representatives from each town school committee would take up, or how does that conversation begin? Do we form a special committee to look at this and make recommendations to the school committee?
This is Randy Rush from the school committee. I'm actually the chair of the regional agreement subcommittee. We started this process a few years ago. It kind of got derailed with COVID and everything. And we've been looking at a lot of these different, we've been at different points invited some of the towns in to talk to us about the regional agreement. The only thing I will say, as far as what Brad was saying with the rolling average versus the October 1 numbers, is I want everyone to understand that that isn't going to change our overall budget. What that changes is how it gets distributed from 1 year to the next, because it affects the percentage change in any one town when it's a 5-year rolling average, but it does not affect the overall budget. With that said, it certainly can, this year would have helped out Ashby, and in past years when there were larger increases in other towns, it would have helped them out as well to smooth out those large additions of students into the district and what they pay as part of their portion of the budget. The regional agreement, if people are not aware, is grossly out of date. The last major change was in 1972, I believe, with a court order change in 1994, maybe, or somewhere in that range for the school committee makeup that we need to go with the at-large members. The majority of what we found in there is there's a lot of language that needs to be updated for new laws, but there's also a lot of conditions today that we didn't have back then. One of them being that we didn't have any district-owned property and district-owned resources. So that is a major thing as far as the regional agreement goes. But again, these also don't affect the budget, but need to be updated. So just getting back to how we form this, I think we're at a point, I will start working with my subcommittee again, and we will look at inviting the towns back in to take a look and get opinions and start forming some more ideas so that we can bring it to the state to get it approved, and then the 3 towns would have to approve it after that.
I think too, Margaret, just so you're aware, I have tried to engage some other regionals just with the transportation piece, and it is a challenge because, you know, regionals are certainly the minority when you look at how many regionals there are as compared to comprehensives. The other piece is some you know, not all regionals are the same. Some regionals are extremely affluent. And then you have other regionals where they have a tremendous amount of commercial, they have a commercial tax base. So that's a significant help, where once you get out into central and western Mass, the commercial tax base seems to start to disappear. And it's more, and all of it is on the taxpayers' backs. So everything that, you know, every increase comes to the taxpayers, and there's not enough business support to help with those increases. So some of the regionals in Eastern Mass that aren't experiencing, you know, it's the same formula, but there's not as much of an issue for those regionals. Whereas in Central and Western Mass and some of the regionals down the Cape, it's different. It's more of a stressor on the residential tax base. So I think if we could get some to come forward and join, we'd have a better chance of getting some change.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, joining forces. I mean, you look at the proposed budget and the aid from the state, and aid to schools goes up over $485 million. It's an 8.8% increase over last year, and we got 0.04% of that. I mean, that's outrageous, and we all should be up in arms about that. And we should get other districts that are like-minded and have the same issues to say, hey, the formula's broken. Like, this just does not make sense that you got 8.8% increase, and you're giving us pennies for communities that can't sustain that because they don't have the business support. They don't have affluent families living in our communities. It's just not sustainable.
And to compound it, we're not urban, we're not rural. So that takes so many grants off the table. We apply for everything. Everything that's possible, we apply for. And we tend not to get them because we're not urban and we're not rural. So we kind of fall in the middle, and we just end up not qualifying, and we get the thank you for applying letter, and we don't get the grant. I mean, we get the grants that everyone gets, you know, some of the Title I grants and things of that nature, but we're not getting the competitive grants.
So do you feel like Mars, because they represent all of the regionalized systems, do you feel like, oh, if it's not more than half of us who are being affected by this, that they wouldn't, you know, help join in and make a louder voice? Or would they represent, like, say, I don't know how many regionalized school systems there are, but let's just say 30% of us are that, you know, we're not the affluent kind, you know, we don't have the commercial industrial tax base of the others. Like, so we're a minority. They represent the, you know, as far as the base of Mars membership goes, the majority are the affluent and have the larger tax base. Do you think Mars would be willing to represent us as a smaller constituency?
So it's interesting. Most of the regionals in Eastern Mass really don't participate in the Mars meetings. Most of the Mars leadership is also from Central and Western Mass. So I do think that they would be more than willing to engage and to help us out. It's whether or not other regionals really in Central and Western Mass, and if we can get some from Eastern Mass to jump on board as well, that would be helpful. But if we could get, you know, a handful of districts to move in this direction with us, I think we're going to have a much better chance of success than if it's just us moving forward. Just because there are so many, most of your legislators at this point in time weren't in office when regional schools came into being, and and the benefit was sold as to why schools should regionalize. So a lot of those officials are now gone. And in some cases, there are comprehensive school districts that are bitter. Their regionals are even getting 70% reimbursement for their transportation when they're not getting any. But again, they forgot the real reason as to why schools regionalized. There was supposed to be a benefit, and it was supposed to be something that wasn't cost prohibitive to the member towns of a regional school district. And that's what's happened, because in the community I live in, a 3.06% budget increase is a 3.06% budget increase. It's not a, you know, a 5, 6, or almost 13% budget increase, depending upon which town you live in.
Yep.
So it definitely impacts regional school districts in a very negative way. It's not sustainable.
So, can I ask a question? And it is, would us being able to join in with, you know, like Quabbin Regional and Orange and all of that, if with us joining in together and facing the legislature, is that the way that we need to go here? Because I'm not really sure how a formula like that with a town, with towns like ours, with no commercial base for it, and we get less money, it makes no sense. I agree wholeheartedly with that. How do they figure out that?
I think so. All of this was figured out quite some time ago. That being said, I do think that, you know, Sheila Muir, who I know is a superintendent in Quabbin, I think would be very interested in this, as would many other regional school districts that are dealing with the same things that we are. But we really need a path to get a group of legislators to listen to us. Now, when Mars has their annual breakfast, and they haven't had it for 2 years because of COVID, over at Neshoba Tech, the state reps and the state senators come, and it's kind of the same thing, the same you know, conversation, so to speak, and then it disappears. I think we need to get to a point where it's, you know, we almost become like a bad penny and we don't go away. If we're going to make this work, we can't go away. We have to continue to push for it. We have to continue to fight for it, but we have to make sure that there are people with us who are experiencing the same thing, because as with everything, the strength in numbers.
So Brad, is it fair to say that, like if you gave me a list of these regional schools that fit our profile, North Middlesex's profile, as you've described it, if we were able to have a conversation with them over the next few days, and I can't imagine that people that are in our boat, you know, who are looking at these budget numbers, and as Ashby has said, it's like, oh my gosh, this is dire, we're going to have to make cuts. If we were able to get in touch with them, is it possible to make a change with, I think John Ladick had said, you know, ask for a commitment that any additions to state aid from the governor's initial budget comes down to, you know, the regional schools or this group of regional schools? Is it practical to say we could get that done for this budget cycle if we put pressure on the legislators?
I don't know if it's possible. I mean, the budget's not finalized until the end of July, right, Nancy? From the governor's budget?
Yes. Yes, okay. I'm still here. Sorry. Yeah, the next, I believe it goes to the Senate, and then we usually get the final budget in somewhere around, hopefully around July 1st, long after town meetings.
Okay.
So that's kind of the problem, is that it comes after May, when the town meetings have already voted on their budget. I mean, I suppose anything is possible. You know, I saw that the governor signed off some additional funds today, none of which are going to hit us. But I do think it's, you know, we've reached a point where, you know, even if it isn't for this year, how do we make this year work? And how do we benefit future years? Because I don't think waiting another year is the answer. I think that we have to move. I think we do have to organize in a way with other school districts to try to get this, you know, on someone's front burner as opposed to their back burner.
Right. And I do agree that some of these are longer term, certainly, as Randy described, the regional agreement, but you just said, how do we make this year work? If we can't get to the legislators, and I do believe, like for ours, I think Senator Kennedy is behind this 100%, and he's been a very vocal advocate for Pepperell. I think he would certainly make a lot of noise. I'm not sure where Senator Goby stands, but, you know, I think we could bring her on board. Like, how many would it take to make noise? So I guess, you know, I'm thinking about pursuing that path, but how can we make this year work if that can't somehow get us monies that will be earmarked or released or something so that towns know, oh, we're going to have relief when we go to town meeting. We know we're going to be getting this extra funding from the state.
Excuse me, Margaret, this is Kathy Blurs from Ashby. So I asked a question on the chat about how much would we anticipate these 5 additional positions, the assistant facilities director, maintenance, etc. There's 5 positions there. How much do you think that would impact this year's budget?
Honestly, I'm not trying to avoid answering the question, but with the competition that's out there, any that fall within a salary schedule are difficult to predict based on the pool that applies. The other piece that has to be considered is whether or not they take benefits, which also has a cost, of around $20,000 per person associated with it.
Sure.
We try to budget most positions around $60,000 in that range, $65,000, but sometimes it's just not possible. So I think on the low end, without benefits, we'd be looking at maybe 300,000, 300 to 350,000 in that range.
Right.
And we do try to be responsible with that. We always want to get the best person, but we also try to be cognizant of the budget as well.
Right. So this is not going to be a popular statement to throw out there, but the reality is Ashby has been operating with 3 people in their highway department. We've been operating for several months without a town administrator. We've been operating with a much lower than acceptable number of police officers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we are looking to potentially not rehire for those positions, eliminate them through attrition, or possibly have to make some additional cuts that affect our public safety, then I have to sit back and wonder whether looking the other way, if the school district is going to add 5 new positions because we really need them. I'm going to have a hard time getting behind that. There's lots. 30% of our town is over 60. We have some public safety issues that need to be addressed. So, it's not just about the school, and we can't just let the school do what they need to do when every other aspect of town services has to make cuts that will end up impacting the other services that we need to provide. Sorry, but that's how I feel.
Folks, this is Andrew from the town of Pepperell, and I am very grateful to hear all this involvement. And I know these budget discussions, as just expressed, each of our towns have gone through these this year and in past years and will in the future. And we're all empathetic and sympathetic to this challenge, and we all want good schools. Craig asked earlier about focusing on ideas for the topic on the screen, the proposed paths forward, and we have a number of good ideas here. Are there any other suggestions that broaden this list, or that we could add to this before we start attacking them?
I would just like to add another data point, not to harp on the state aid issue, but if we're going to get Senator Kennedy and others on our side and to advocate for us, I'd like to know why our district got the minimum possible amount of state aid increase. The funding formula guarantees that the districts don't get less than they had in FY22, and that the minimum amount of state aid that they could increase by is $30 per pupil. And if you round our enrollment to about 3,000 students, that's a couple $1,000s off the 90 grand that we got this year as the increase, as the 0.4%. So What is it about our district that says we deserve the absolute minimum?
Unfortunately, Craig,
I'm sorry.
the problem is we're what's called a hold harmless district, which means that our enrollment has declined, and they're not penalizing us for that. We're just getting, if our enrollment had doubled, then we would have gotten a lot more money to go along with the enrollment. And Nancy, you can probably explain this better than me.
But 153 districts had enrollment go down. So where did the other 8.8%? Where did all that go?
Really, if your enrollment is going down, then you are getting just an extra, like whatever it is, $30 per student that you have. You don't get a big increase in Chapter 70 to keep up with your enrollment. With no enrollment changes, you're just getting this little bit above. It's the way it works across the whole state. It's not against North Middlesex. There is a whole commission that was put together across the state to address the Chapter 70 formula and how it allocates money.
But our enrollment didn't go down.
No, but it did increase.
Yeah, it's over time.
Right.
So there are, out of the 318 districts, 136 of those are getting the minimum aid, which for the governor's proposal was $30 per student. So there are 136 districts in our same situation with aid, and it's the loss of enrollment over time that's driven that.
Andrew, the other path forward, I think Andrew, are you typing on the screen?
I can be.
Okay, the only other thing that I think we should talk about is the bidding process for buses. I mean, it is for all intents and purposes illegal, and they do need to look into it and either have the state take it over so that it's fair and appropriate across the Commonwealth. Right now, again, we don't. There is no. It's by law, it's supposed to go out to bid, and interestingly enough, I would guess that 99% of the communities in the state get one bid. It's strange how it works out. It's very, very expensive.
Okay, Eldon Gerhardt, Ashby Finance Committee. Since you brought that up, there's a lot of tools that the government has to use that they can use against monopolies. One of the strongest being price capping. And has that been talked to about the state as to whether they're willing to look into price capping transportation? Has anyone brought that to your attention or spoke to them about it?
So the only conversations that I have had, and I've had direct conversations with first the state auditor, who told me that nothing could be done on her end, and then she forwarded me to the solicitor and told me quite honestly that it was just not a priority at the State House at this point. I did ask if it was being investigated, and I was told that that was not information I was privy to. But they kept repeating that it was a process that they were looking into, but that's all that they would give me. And that's been over the past 2 years. So they just, they don't seem to be moving. And there does not seem to be an appetite for addressing it at the State House, other than basically coming back and saying that we should consider ourselves lucky because there are some that feel as though we should not be getting any reimbursement for transportation, yet we should still have to guarantee a seat for every student on the bus, even if they're not riding it.
Okay, who did you speak to again? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Solicitor General.
Okay. Another question. You stated earlier, maybe I misunderstood you, but you stated that in your budget you have salaries for the possibility of hiring 4 or 5 teachers depending upon the class size changes. Was that correct?
It's a 4 or 5 FTE increase over our current staffing. And in some cases, I think 1 or 2 of the positions, again, I was not really prepared to speak about the specifics of the budget tonight, just based on what I was told the meeting was about. In some cases, we do have positions in there as a contingency. We always try to have something in there for both regular education and special education, because special education is an example where, quite honestly, you can't go over a certain number in class sizes, and you have to be ready to respond if you have, a student come into the district that puts a class over an acceptable class size, or quite honestly, in some cases, if we have a student move into the district that requires a one-to-one paraprofessional as part of their IEP, we have to make sure that we have funds available to fund that position. It's not an option. By law, we have to follow through with it.
Well, I guess my question is, since we have that money in the budget, would it be possible, instead of having that money in the budget and hiring a counselor to help these students catch up for school they've missed, to have a teacher that could be assigned to do that, that could be assigned to help the students that are having issues with catching back up, instead of hiring a counselor and then technically sitting on the bench, more money for some teachers, have those teachers come in, and if they're not necessarily needed, or if there are hours that they can do it, have a classroom for these students that are falling behind for some reason or whatever, to help bring them up to speed, to get them going. That way we don't have a bench team and a field team, and our money's getting used more efficiently, as far as everybody's doing what they can to keep the school going as cheaply as possible. And then I have a second question, but I'll let you comment on that before I ask it.
Can I speak to that, Brad?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So we hired 14 teachers this year to catch up students academically. The social emotional needs of students, the two sides of the house have different skill sets. So we currently have 14 additional teachers working at all K-8 buildings to help students with any gaps. So, but we have a step down approach to that over the next 2 years because the money's going away. So we don't want to take all those supports out at once, but we are going from 14, we're going to 12, and then we're going to 7 over the next 3 years, knowing that money would go away. So we can't keep that as something for students, because if we took all of that out at once, there would be a bigger impact later on. But the adjustment counselors have a whole different skill set when you're thinking of emotional needs and academic needs. And if students aren't emotionally ready, you won't get the academics out of students. So that's why we're seeing that need. And the skill set and the salaries for those positions are much higher than the interventionists that we put in.
So Nancy, excuse me, but Kathy Bolaris again, is the immediate go-to answer to have an adjustment counselor for these kids to be able to tap into, as opposed to having, child psychologists that our insurances pay for, and they get that type of attention outside of the school.
So what we're seeing a different need of students nowadays than we have seen in the past. Students are coming to school not ready for a variety of different reasons, and the needs are growing for adjustment counselors to help students adjust and get ready for the learning of today's world. We really are running a school system in its entirety. It's systematically not meeting our students' needs, and that's a national conversation. But in the meantime, their needs are growing. And in order to be able to be academically ready, we need this on-site, and those outside services aren't available for all students. We work with Project Interface. We refer a lot of students outside of school, and they can't get the help they need. There's different levels of what we're looking for. We really need school-based resources for students, not after school and not private sessions for students. We have a lot of students that take advantage of that, and their families work with their insurance companies. But like even going back to what Brad said, you're not seeing that those availabilities everywhere for students. I mean, there are students that are waiting for months to get in with a new psychologist or psychiatrist or anybody else that they're looking for private. So we really need school
outside of school.
Outside of school, yeah.
And just to add to that, just because it was brought up, the great majority of if students are able to get an appointment outside of school, which is extremely difficult, the great majority of the people that are available are not accepting health insurance. It's pay out of pocket, which is cost prohibitive for most.
Do you have like just a rough utilization rate of these counselors in the school? Like how many students are they speaking to a day? How often are they being used? Did you have a rough idea?
I can say 100% of their time is definitely maximized, but I couldn't tell you based on caseload needs per building. So
Okay.
The majority of them are going, well, the majority of them over the past, I mean, since we've gone back full-time in person, are essentially going without a lunch.
Okay.
And they're making phone calls before and after the school day.
Okay. Then just
Well, taking our school nurses, it's kind of the same thing with our school nurses.
Okay. Then my final question, then I'll get off of here. I realize you've just recently done collective bargaining, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. For the insurance, what is the percentages for the insurance? I mean, we're talking $20,000 per employee that uses them. That's some pretty amazing health insurance. So I was wondering, like, what are the percentages? Is there a way to increase their percentage that they pay? Maybe also reduce reduce the copay level or increase the copay levels, something like that. Because I know in a lot of places of work, when they run into a tight situation and insurance starts going up, you can see, your copays for visits, your copays for prescriptions increase. And I'm just wondering is what the insurance is looking at right now. I realize it's a collective bargaining agreement. But I was wondering if maybe that is not something that couldn't be tweaked or modified to add, every little penny and nickel counts.
It's not something that could be tweaked until the next CBA.
Yes.
But could it be tweaked? Certainly. It could certainly be tweaked, but it would not be something that we would address until the next CBA because it's part of the current CBA.
Yeah, that would be a long term, yes.
So as Andrew said a few minutes ago, these are really important questions and show a lot of detail. But Andrew, if you could scroll back to the first page, I think, of the ideas for legislative conversations, just to help move us along. I think if each town reviewed their budget line items from the school and provided specific questions or proposals, the select board in concert with the FinCom and perhaps talking with the school committee members about those particular areas, like that might help each town. And then I do think the reason that Pepperell had asked that we get together was to, in addition to focus on this larger piece. It's almost right now, the position I feel like we're in is town versus gown. And the town services are so important, highway departments, town administrators, having adequate, first responders, but education is also critical. So here we are trying to, just push each other up against the wall when really the state is leaving us holding this big bag. And certainly whatever we can do budget-wise for this FY23 budget, and I think we've laid out several things, again, looking at those specific line items, asking the school committee to relook. I know there've been eloquent arguments about the E&D funds, but is there some room there? Can we dip into that one more time with the understanding that it seems like there's pretty full-throated commitment from this group that we have got to make fundamental changes at the state legislature, and at the same time put pressure on them. And I'm willing to work with Brad. I'm willing to contact these other school districts, regionalized districts that fit our profile, and I'm willing to, I think Senator Kennedy would be happy to help. Like, let's marshal those forces and have those conversations at the State House, in the coming weeks to get that fixed. And then we have several ideas for longer term proposals. But how does that sound?
Mark, I think that makes sense. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, we've talked a lot about the schools, but not much about the towns. And I think it's going to be important for Ashby to look at their long-term plans. They've got a lot of growth, a lot of people moving into town. And again, we saw this year, a relatively small number of new students from Ashby had a huge impact on their budget. Without that increase in students, we wouldn't be having this meeting. So if we use more E&D this year, we're going to be in a worse situation next year if they have similar growth. So what is Ashby going to do to address that problem with the needs that they have? Are they going to pursue an override? Are they going to pursue other avenues to make sure that we're not having the same conversation, at least for my 5th year in a row? Because that's something we haven't addressed. It doesn't take many students with the population that they have to sway the percentages in a significant amount. And that's, again, what we saw this year, or what we're seeing this year. So there's conversations we can have about school district funding and whatnot, but that doesn't address the issue that we're seeing this year with Ashby specifically.
Well, Craig, I think it's Ashby this year, but if I'm not mistaken, it was Pepperell a few years ago. And
Oh, it was, and we had to do an override, and I mean, it wasn't fun, and nobody liked it. But we've talked a lot about the schools. I'd like to hear what you guys are doing and what you're looking at and pursuing on the town side.
well, first looking at the school budget, I want to make sure that there's nothing in there that doesn't absolutely have to be in there. And that should be something that we should all be in favor of.
And that's, I think that was the intent of our budget summits starting back in October. We invited FinComs and town administrators and select boards to do exactly that. And I think we did that, and we ended up at a place where, at least from my perspective, this is what our students need. This is the minimum of what they need to be successful moving forward.
Unfortunately, we've been in somewhat, I'm sorry, Craig, what town are you from and what's your position?
I'm chair of the school committee. I'm from Pepperell.
Okay, so, you know, we have a lot of other issues in our little town besides the school-related issues. That's all that, you know, matters here tonight. But, you know, what we're planning to do and the cuts that we're planning to make, I don't think are appropriate for this conversation. And I have no intention of getting into them. You know, that's not where we're at. I'm looking at the budget and I'm saying, do we really need 3 new teachers? Do we really need an assistant maintenance person? Do we really need? And those are the types of things that I'm looking at for the short term, which is one of the things we were supposed to discuss.
Kathy, I agree with you. This is Andrew from Pepperell again. And I also agree with Craig. We have had regular meetings with the schools going back about 3 years to help frame these things. The schools show us what their pain points are. The towns talk about what they perceive as revenue strengths and weaknesses. And this is done well in advance of the budget being prepared. Not to say that these increases aren't shocks to all of us. The schools make up more than 60% of Pepperell's budget. And when they go up more than our growth, it feels like a really big number. But the time and the place for the things you're saying are in this document already tonight. The first thing on the list, it's highlighted in red right now. Review the submittal from the school. It's available on their website. It was presented to the towns a few weeks ago, and provide specific feedback on it. Tonight was intended to be a little more high level, and we have gathered a lot of that information. But it wasn't intended to debate whether or not we need 5 teachers or 6 teachers, that sort of thing. It was to look more on this slide, ways that we might be able to make changes at the state level, because if the state increase was more in line with the school increase, the town increases would be lower. That really small increase is what's causing the town budgets to spike, along with some population. But that population changes happen every year.
Sure, and I understand that, Andrew. And with respect, you know, I was under the impression that we were going to talk about short term and long term.
That's right. And we've done that, but I didn't think, well, we didn't intend it to be a highly detailed discussion, because there are hundreds of lines in the school budget. We're looking for the big picture ideas that the schools can look at and perhaps make some adjustments. They've done it in years past. And then also what we can do collaboratively across the district. Things like putting together a group. It looks like someone from the school's already offered to restart the regional agreement process. That's more mid-term or long-term, but those are good suggestions.
Margaret, so I'd like also to keep that moving forward with that comment to say, do we form a new committee? Do we form a group? How do you think we should be moving forward with all of this?
That is a great question. Andrew, I'm happy to take some guidance from you. I mean, for myself, as I mentioned, I'm more than happy to talk to Superintendent Morgan tomorrow. I think he's, made some offers in that regard to find out more about these other regional schools that might fit in this bucket. Rebecca Walsh has put her contact information in the chat, and I've recorded it to find out which regional schools fit our category, try to band together, and also at the same time looping in our state legislators. Our regional school system currently, we don't have a state representative. Our current one has been appointed to a court magistrate position, but we do have a very powerful state senator. Ashby has a different state senator, and I have already talked to other state senators who are willing to lend a hand. So on that front, I think we can go forward. Randy had mentioned ramping up we just talked about that, the regional agreement group. And for each of us on the call, again, going back to the first bullet from John Laddick, to just review the North Middlesex school budget and provide your comments back to them as well. So I think those are generally the next steps. I won't know what it looks like until I talk to the superintendent. I see that Quentin Cutler has also volunteered to help. So I think we can come up with a plan fairly shortly, and I could let everybody on this call know. I think I have almost everyone's email who's on this call. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
If I may, we should also reach out to the Massachusetts Municipal Association because they advocate on behalf of all the cities and towns. And I know that they did send a letter recently to the State House stating their concerns about Chapter 70 funding, regional transportation funding. So they're also a tremendous asset that can potentially help us advocate for these issues.
That's a good point, Christine. Thank you so much. And it's been said a couple of times during this call, I just think there hasn't been a united front and a united will. And I feel like we will have a very loud voice. And I think that might help to make a difference. But I will reach out to the MMA. I remember seeing that email.
Margaret, for my part, I can tell the other towns that the town of Pepperell every year puts together legislative funding requests that we share with our delegation. We just did so recently, and it included an entire section on regional needs, including education issues, several of which were addressed here tonight. I'd be happy to share that document with my fellow town administrators, and they can modify it to meet the needs of their town and perhaps send it to their legislative delegations as well.
That sounds good. Thank you.
I would just like to make one point. I don't want the school board to feel like we are attacking you, okay? But really to get short-term results, waiting for the government to move, waiting to get groups together to go towards the government, that's more of a long-term thing. And I think the short-term positives and effects are going to have to come between us talking to the school board, finding compromise, seeing what absolutely cannot go, what could maybe trim some. I think that's where the short-term goals. So I think that's kind of where we're addressing the school board. And we're not trying to attack you. I mean, I don't want you guys to be offended that we're attacking you and thinking you're all the problem. I realize it's the state. The state is negligent in its ability to fund what it said it would fund and what it should honestly be funding. But for short term, it has to be the towns and the school. We have to figure out how to bring that number down if we're going to help each other. That's all I want to say. I was worried you guys might feel you were being attacked at this meeting, and I didn't want you to feel that way.
I appreciate that, Alvin. Thank you.
Andrew, will we also be able to share this PowerPoint that has your copious notes in it with everyone on the call?
Absolutely. I might clean it up a little bit. I'm sure there's a few typos in there, but I can make it available. I'll submit it out through my fellow TAs in Ashby and Townsend and let them share it with their respective committees and boards.
Andrew, if you could include me as well so I can share that with the school committee, I'd appreciate that.
You got it. I've just put the link, Nancy Haynes put this in the chat, but I believe this is a link directly to the school budget on their website. So folks looking for that, there have been some questions about it. It was mentioned earlier, but when you get this PowerPoint slideshow tomorrow or whenever you get it, you'll be able to link right to it. If there's no other incredible ideas or rich uncles that we can call, I'd suggest we can turn this back over to John Laddick, who has kindly hosted this meeting for us tonight on behalf of the Pepperell Finance Committee.
Thanks, Andrew. I would ask just in general if anybody from my committee or the Pepperell Finance Committee has anything to say or add.
No comment from me, John.
All right, thanks, Quentin. I'm all set, Zach. That's all set. Just before I ask those folks to adjourn the meeting, I'll just send out one last request to anybody if they have anything else they would like to add. We're willing to listen to it. Going once, twice. All right, I will ask somebody from our committee, Pepperell Finance Committee, to make a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the Pepperell Finance Committee meeting.
Thanks, Quentin. Second. Thank you, Zach. All right, with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:32, and I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to participate, and hopefully we can make some positive progress towards understanding the budget better and handling what we're faced with. Thank you again.
Dave, can you adjourn us, please?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Just for the school committee, we lost a quorum when Susan left, so we adjourned at that point by default. So thanks, everybody.
We adjourn the Townsend Select Board meeting.
Yes, I'll make the motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
All right.
Christine, I hope you've had a good first week.
Good night, all. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
Can I get a motion to
This
adjourn?
conference is no longer being recorded.
Motion made.
Second.
Second.
Okay. I move that the Ashby Finance Committee adjourn this meeting at 8:34 p.m. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks.